Welcome to the Blah 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 Career Cast, focused on sharing the career stories of real people. I'm Jennifer Chenoweth, a wife, mom, Midwesterner, and career coach. Today's guest is my friend Claire Williams. Claire is an author, a writer, and coach, and in today's episode, we talk inner critic and overcoming what the mind is telling you. Enjoy. I'm so happy to have you here today, Claire.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So what's the story that you want to spend our time talking about today, Claire?
I would love to share, actually, for the first time, I've never spoken publicly about this, except maybe just a quick allusion in passing. But I want to share about a really hard season in my career it started at one point, but then it's had echoes. It recurrently comes back around. And it's really around anxiety and especially public speaking, performance anxiety, and the way that has thrown me curveballs, but also brought me a lot of my own inner work to do that has really helped me grow as a person and not just a professional.
Wow, this is a big story. Thank you for being willing to share this story on this platform. What I find in my work is when we share our stories, there are many people who
Yeah.
also feel seen and valued when we hear
Yeah.
very human moments. And
Yeah.
so thank you for your
Yeah.
platform to share. What's the
That's
best
my
place
hope.
for us to start, Claire?
I can tell you from the beginning how this thing cropped up and became its own little gremlin, or very big gremlin in my life. I started working in the nonprofit world right out of college, and I actually thought I was going down one career path when I took a hard left and went down another. So in my mid to late 20s, I shifted over to the corporate world. I was working for a very large retailer and started doing talent development, leadership development work. And a big part of my job was getting up in front of roomfuls of team members and leaders and teaching them things. And coming from the nonprofit world to the corporate world, not having a relevant degree in that space, there was a whole lot of imposter syndrome going on. It was really, how did I get this job feeling? But it actually went really great at first. And I was learning my way through baptism by fire and making it work. And about a year and a half in, I all of a sudden started having panic attacks in front of large rooms of people.
Oh,
And I had never had a panic attack before. I had heard the term anxiety. I didn't necessarily relate it to myself in any way, but I got very scared very fast about what is going on with my body and my brain. And am I going to be able to do this job? Or am I going to have to take another hard left in my career and find another path to go down?
so you're in this new organization, already feeling like, holy smokes, I got this big job. And you and I have worked together in the past. So
Yes.
I will echo that I felt a similar way at this organization.
Yeah,
I felt that I was like, I don't know if they know who they hired
I
just
know.
yet. At some point, they're going to figure this out and this is going to end.
Totally.
In the meantime, I'm going to really enjoy working with all of these very smart people.
Yeah.
And being familiar with your work and standing in front of rooms of really qualified, amazingly capable leaders, like, how did you know that you were did you know it was a panic attack? Like, what was happening and how did you figure out that what was happening was a panic attack?
Yeah, it's a great question. I didn't know at the time that it was a panic attack. I didn't have that language. I thought it was a case of extreme nerves, which it was. That's another way of saying it. But I had grown up singing on stage, speaking on stage, and I always had some butterflies in the stomach, even though I was used to it. But I had never had the physical complete shutdown of my body that started to happen. So it was things like my throat closed up and I couldn't breathe. I felt like my heart was pounding so hard that I was going to pass out. And one of the worst things was that my brain would go totally blank. So I would be in the middle of a sentence and all of a sudden, sometimes I wouldn't even feel that nervous in the moment, but it would come rushing at me, and all of a sudden I would have no idea, what did I just say? What do I need to say next? How do I recover from this? And after a couple of instances of that, I was like, I got to nip this in the bud. And I started barking up all kinds of trees. One of those trees I barked up was talking to my doctor. And
Mm.
my doctor said, sounds like anxiety. I was like,
Mm.
oh, I didn't know that I had anxiety. And I'll share about the other trees that I barked up too. But that was a piece of the puzzle for me, was understanding that I do think there was some undiagnosed anxiety going on there. And I'm happy to talk about where that led me because medication actually is a part of my story, but it's certainly not the only part of my story. But that was really how the anxiety, the panic attacks really came into my consciousness as a thing.
So it's like my worst dream. Those
Yeah.
moments where you're like being chased and you can't run, or like trying to scream and nothing's coming out. And
Yeah.
so it sounds all
Yeah.
of those cases where I've dreamt this and all of a sudden this is happening in
Yeah.
real life. And how did you like, how many times did this happen before you were like, I've got to figure out what this is?
Not a lot because
Okay.
I just knew it wasn't sustainable. But even after I sought help, and not just with my doctor, but I was working with mentors, I was reading books and talking to other people who'd maybe been through something similar. But I just knew I had to figure it out or I wasn't going to be able to do my job and stay sane. Yeah, so it was it, even after I found out what was going on though, it that was just the beginning because then it became something I had to reckon with, not just from an anxiety perspective, but from an inner work perspective, facing my inner demons and what is the fear that's really coming up in me in these moments and why is it surfacing now when I've been on stages my whole life and all of a sudden I can't be. So it opened up a lot of questions and lines of exploration that have taken me many years to continue working with, and I'm still working with it now. This is not
Yeah.
something that's a closed book in my past.
So this happens to you, and as a high performing female, I'm sure you immediately said this is a me problem and I've got to figure this shit out. At
Yeah,
least what I would have said to myself is like, get it
totally.
there, Jen, figure this
Yeah.
shit out because this can't keep happening. This doesn't feel good for you, and this certainly isn't the experience that I want to create for the people that I'm in front of. Walk me through like what's the path that you went down to figuring
Hmm.
out like what was underneath all of this?
Yeah. Actually, right around that time is when I started my own path towards becoming a coach. So I was in coaching school, and I remember having these moments in my coaching program where I was learning about things that your clients might face, like imposter syndrome. And I was like, oh my God, that's me. That's what's happening to me right now.
Mm.
And so, anyone who's gone through coaching training like you, Jen, knows that the biggest thing you take away from it is actually your own work and your
Yeah.
own growing and self awareness and facing your inner demons. So, that was a big part of it was using what I was learning in many settings, but certainly in my coaching program about the belief structures that were very unconscious in my mind, but that were running me. They were like my operating system that I didn't even know was turned on. And so it was unconscious thoughts like, what if I'm not good enough? What if
Mhm.
everybody finds out I'm not good enough? What if I fail and can't recover from this? What if I'm not as talented as I think I am? So a
Mhm.
lot of recognizing, starting to recognize that my identity and sense of worth was really wrapped up in my image and in what other people perceived to be true about me. So much so that if that started to be called into question, it would feel like, who am I now? And that's a
Yeah.
very scary proposition. And so that was a big piece of the inner work that I had to start reckoning with is like, why does that matter so deeply to me?
Mm.
Can I unhook from that? Is that possible? And then the other piece that I mentioned was I would call it like the practical interventions. So one of those
Mhm.
for me was starting an anxiety medication. I was already in therapy, but I doubled down and went to more
Yeah.
therapy. I've done my own coaching. And then also, I can talk more about this, but a lot of other practical strategies of just like working with the body and the nervous system and breathing and meditation and power posing. There's all kinds of little tricks that help calm the nervous system in stasis and in those acute moments where anxiety might kick up. So yeah, it was like a whole smorgasbord of things I tried.
Yeah. And I'm sure there was a moment, like any person who's experienced imposter syndrome, of am I in the wrong job? Is this
Oh,
just not
totally. Totally.
where I should be? Like of all the things you're considering, one of those options has to be like, clearly this path is wrong.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How did you keep yourself? Because I feel like I probably worked with you at or around these times, and you always presented yourself with extreme grace and class, and really, you really seem to have your shit together, Claire. So
Thank you. Good
yeah,
faker.
yeah. And could you maybe walk me through in slow motion what you went down the path of doing your own inner work. You went down the path of compensating through some functional therapies, right? So talking to a
Mhm.
therapist, doing your own coaching, getting some meds. And my guess is, even with all of those structures in place, these messages in your mind still showed up.
Yeah.
Then what? How did you handle it?
The way I describe that is really similar to how I describe all kinds of personal growth and inner work, including with the clients that I coach, which is that it, just starting to spot what is unconscious and bring it into consciousness starts the process of that thing releasing its hold on you. I really think the most powerful process has been the process of what I would call disidentification, which is a fancy psychological term for not equating my identity with something that is not my identity. And in this case, not equating my identity with those thought patterns, with feelings of insecurity or anxiety, and realizing like those are parts of me or those are things that are occurring to me or in me, but it's not me. It doesn't define me.
Mhm.
And can I start to separate my sense of worth and autonomy from those other things that are swirling and step outside of them and look at them objectively and work with them with curiosity and compassion instead of like, tough it out, Claire, you gotta put on your big girl pants. There's some loving on that little tender insecure part of me that's still in there and still comes out sometimes, and not expecting that I'm gonna just totally overcome it and get rid of that part of me. Like it's always gonna be there. And I think redefining my relationship to that part of me has been really freeing. But yeah, not like one and done. It is a process that comes and goes still for me.
Claire, I know you worked on that in that organization and you have since gone on to do work outside of that organization. You have your own thing that you do these days. And I'm curious to know, how closely does your identity of who you consider yourself to be tie to what your job is?
I would love to sit here and tell you that, oh, my identity is totally agnostic of my job now. Like I have done my inner work and I define myself just by who I am and not what I do. But I know myself well enough to know that those patterns of identifying myself and my worth with what I do, the image I project, do I look competent? Do I seem successful? That's a real, like on a personality level, that's just a really hardwired pattern in me.
Yeah.
And it's another one of those things that I just have to keep noticing and give some compassion to, but try to check myself. And even in the last week, I just was noticing like, oh, I've wrapped up in this thing I'm building, and it's probably at a level where if it doesn't go where I want it to, I'm gonna feel bad about who I am. And how do I need to reorient to this thing so that it doesn't take up more space in my heart and my soul than it needs to.
Yeah. What are you doing today in your work, Claire? Because I think one of the questions the people who listen to this career cast often say is like, where do you go from you're down a path, you worked in the nonprofit sector, you went to the for-profit sector, you had this inner knowing or this acknowledgement of, gosh, the way I'm showing up isn't working for me, but you continue to have a really, I know this about you, you continue to have a really successful career there and have gone on to do some really incredible things. What's the story that you tell about your career progression?
I love that question. I see the story as sometimes I call it like getting closer to the fire, but it's almost like the fire is a moving target. So if the fire represents the level of like challenge and spark and intensity that keeps me interested and engaged in my work. When I was in nonprofit, I was 22 and just having a job was like heat. That was fire. That was exciting. And moving from nonprofit to the corporate world was obviously a huge challenge that triggered a lot of stuff in me. And I left the corporate world about 6 years ago now to go out on my own as an entrepreneur. So I'm a coach and team coach, and more recently doing more writing and speaking. And yet, even in those 6 years, my story about what I want to be when I grow up has continued to evolve and change. So it's more of a felt sense for me of, do I feel lit up by this? Do I feel challenged by what I'm doing right now? And there's a constant reinvention that has been really fun and really freeing, but also scary as hell sometimes. But a thing I'll mention related to our earlier topic about anxiety and panic attacks and performance stuff is when I left my corporate job, I thought I had that part of me mastered. Like it was on a leash, it was in the cage. And all of a sudden, in my last couple of weeks on that job and then into my new entrepreneurial life, I started having panic attacks again. And I think it was my body and brain's way of telling me, like, oh, you really got to take care of yourself in this. You feel ready, you feel like you can do this, you're confident, come a long way in your confidence, but
Mm,
that scared little girl is still in there and she's triggered right now.
mm,
And so I've seen that when I take on a big new challenge, sometimes this thing rears its head in a new way,
yeah.
but I'm also not happy if I'm not challenged. So
Yeah.
it's not worth it to me to let it keep me small.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask you, like, how much did environment play into the triggers of the panic attacks? But you're telling me that it happens in all the environments,
Yeah.
that there's not a shift, and that's really interesting.
Yeah.
What's the lesson that you hope people take away from hearing your story, Claire?
Oh, there's so many I could say that that I reflected on before today. I think the biggest lesson would be when you come up against something in yourself or your context that scares the shit out of you,
Mm,
get curious, step into it, engage with it. And maybe the answer is, this is not for you, go find a new job. I'm so thankful though that I didn't just take that first dose of fear and run with my tail between my legs. I'm thankful that I stepped into it and engaged it, not just because I was able to not overcome it, but at least work with it in a way that allowed me to continue to grow in my career. But it
mm,
also helped me grow as a person. Like I feel so much more connected to myself. I feel so much less like I'm not gripping as hard to, I have to have it all together all the time and always look that way. Like it still is part of me, it still shows
yeah.
up, but
Yeah.
it's just not as, it's not as strong. It doesn't create as much reactivity and paranoia in me as it
Yeah.
used to. And I think if it weren't for this kind of big beast of an issue, then I might have just skated along and not dealt with those parts of me that I'm really glad I've looked at now.
Yeah. The body knows. The body knows if something's really
Yeah.
not right. And I think oftentimes we can chalk up our physical symptoms to, I'm not approaching this right, or there's something about me and the way that I'm showing up that I have control over, that I can fix. And sometimes what it sounds like for you is that it was so systemic, that it was like, I really need to peel back the layers of all
Totally.
of this, how I care about myself, how I talk to myself, the stories that I tell myself about these environments, and just constantly pay attention to what are the messages I'm giving
Yeah.
myself so that I can show up in these moments and
Yeah.
feel really safe. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so
Yeah.
true. And I now I have coaching clients who bring up performance anxiety. I coach a lot of
Yeah.
executives who have to get up in front of giant groups and give town halls and look smart. And it's very prevalent, whether it shows up as panic attacks or something else. But I just love that I can just say, I've been there. I don't need to tell you my whole story in a coaching session, but I've been there. And what I do know is that any challenge life throws at us or work throws at us probably involves, the solution involves a combination of inner work and then practical strategies. And some of us want to just lean on one or the other. Many of us are most comfortable with the practical strategies because they feel like, oh, quick fixes. If I just like meditate 10 minutes a day, then I'll calm my nervous system down. And I don't want to look at that like scary gremlin that lives in my brain, but it's really both. And I think it's given me a dose of humility and compassion that I can now bring to the people that I work with as well.
I love that, Claire. Claire's story reveals how practical interventions, inner work, and her own coaching experience helped her understand and manage her anxiety. Claire's story offers a powerful message on the importance of self-compassion, curiosity, and courage in facing and overcoming personal challenges. Thanks for listening.